Before it was a party, it was a fruit on a ballot paper. In 2005, when Kenyans were handed a referendum choice, the government put a banana on one side for yes, for the status quo, for a constitution that kept power concentrated in one man's hand. On the other side, an orange. The orange meant no. It meant we refuse to accept a presidency that answers to no one. We refuse to accept another generation of iniquity. We refuse to accept that justice can wait. We refuse to hand our children what our parents handed us. 58% of Kenyans voted orange that day. They didn't just reject a constitution. They voted for devolution, power to the people, power to the counties. They voted for human rights, for accountability, for a country in which power was not a birthright. The Orange Democratic Movement was born from that refusal. And for the millions who wore it, the fisher folk of Lake Victoria, the tea farmers of the Rift Valley, the traders of the coast, orange didn't just mean Raila Odinga. It meant them. At its peak, ODM was the most powerful opposition force in East Africa, built on the backs of Kenya's working poor. Its stronghold stretched from the shores of Lake Victoria to the Indian Ocean coast. For 20 years, it stood as proof that a different Kenya was possible.
Former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Odinga has died at the age of 80. He'd been at a traditional Indian medical facility in Kerala state in southern India, where he had a cardiac arrest. Mr. Odinga spent many years as an opposition leader, losing 5 presidential campaigns, most recently 3 years ago. He frequently blamed the polls had been rigged. He served as Prime Minister to one of the men who defeated him, Mwai Kibaki, from 2008 to 2013.
Understand what ODM's decline means? You must first understand what it was. Not just a party, but a covenant between a politician and a people who had very little else. The Orange Democratic Movement was born in 2005 from a referendum battle over Kenya's constitution. Raila Odinga led the No campaign against President Mwai Kibaki's draft, adopting the orange as his symbol. When the No side won, the orange became something more than a color. It became a symbol of the people's power against the establishment. ODM spoke to a very specific Kenyan experience. The experience of being excluded. Raila himself had been imprisoned, exiled, politically marginalized for decades. When ordinary Kenyans looked at him, they didn't see a politician. They saw someone who had suffered like them and kept coming back. That was the foundation of everything. Through disputed elections, coalitions, handshakes, and protests, ODM survived everything. It outlasted coalition partners, it outlasted enemies. It buried its debt and kept marching. Its secret was simple. It had a strong leader, and the strong leader had a wide political base. The most politically loyal voting bloc in Kenya, which rallied behind him all the time.
Now in what is becoming a very familiar pattern, those armored water cannon trucks with high pressure water jet systems really just spraying into this Azimio motorcade, and you're seeing that image from the windshield of the vehicle that are.
Then came 2022, and with it, the decision that will change everything. Raila Odinga lost the presidency for the fourth time. But unlike 2007, 2013, and 2017, this time the political mathematics was shifting beneath him. His coalition partners had changed, his allies were moving, and a new force was rising in Kenya, one that had studied Raila carefully and learnt every lesson. William Ruto won the presidency of Kenya in August 2022 on one of the most audacious political platforms the country had ever seen. He was the son of a chicken farmer from Uasin Gishu. He called himself a hustler. His promise was not the language of State House, it was the language of the roadside. Boda rider negotiating Nairobi's traffic, the mama mboga arranging tomatoes before dawn, the small trader counting coins at the end of a hard day. He called it the bottom-up economy, and millions believed him. He won 26 of Kenya's 47 counties. But look at the map, and you see something tells. His support was concentrated. Central Kenya, which had voted for Uhuru Kenyatta for a decade, and the Rift Valley, his own backyard. Two regions, dense, reliable enough. Raila Odinga's votes came from elsewhere. Coast, Nairobi, Western Kenya, the Northeastern, Nyanza, where he swept with margins that defied belief. His support was scattered across the map like rain, wide, diverse, and just not enough. The margin between them was 233,000 votes out of 14 million cast in a country of 54 million. The presidency changed hands on a difference smaller than the population of a single constituency. It was the thinnest victory in Kenya's history, and Ruto knew better than anyone exactly how fragile it was. What Ruto understood better than any Kenyan politician of his generation is that power is not just about winning elections. It is about controlling the conditions under which future elections happen. From the moment he won, he began building political architecture designed to make losing in 2027 structurally impossible. Musalia Mudavadi had run for president 3 times. He was the undisputed face of Western Kenya's political ambitions. He led the Amani National Congress, his party, his platform, his leverage. In 2022, he chose Ruto over Raila, a decision that shocked many who had watched him spend years positioning himself as the alternative to both men. His reward was the position of Prime Cabinet Secretary, a title that exists in Kenya's government structure, but one that many constitutional scholars argue has no clear grounding in the Constitution itself. For Mudavadi, it was not his first taste of high office. He had served briefly as the vice president under President Moi in 2002. tenure so short it felt more like a footnote than a chapter. But Prime Cabinet Secretary was different. It came with a motorcade, a budget, and the full machinery of the state behind it. The only thing it did not come with was independence. Mudavadi held the office, but the office holds him. Critics say he has no influence at all in government direction or policy. He simply takes the trappings, but does nothing or little to influence its own direction. 3 years later, the Amani National Congress was dissolved, officially absorbed into UDA. A court ruled the merger unconstitutional. Mudavadi dismissed the ruling and told his own supporters to forget the party had ever existed. Some political commentators say the moment Mudavadi accepted that position, his independent political life was over. He just didn't know it yet. Once your party dissolves into the ruling party, you have nothing left to negotiate with. Ruto knew this. Mudavadi, I think, only discovered it later.
All it takes is one little click. In June last year, blood was spilt on the grounds of Kenya's parliament. The month before, the government, led by its president, William Ruto, proposed its annual budget, the 2024 finance bill.
If we are a serious state, we must be able to enhance our taxes.
By raising taxes, it promised to address the country's growing debt problem.
I vote yes.
But many young Kenyans, nicknamed Gen Zs, didn't see it that way.
Then came March 2025. Raila and Ruto signed the MOU, and ODM's inner circle walked in one by one. They had been part of the government about 2 weeks after the Gen Z protest, when the president reconstituted his cabinet, but there was no formal agreement until March of 2025. John Badi, ODM chairman, the man who had sat on the opposition benches for years, holding the party's parliamentary wing together, now cabinet secretary for the National Treasury, Kenya's finance minister. Hassan Joho, now cabinet secretary mining. Hassan Joho, the governor of Mombasa for 10 years, one of the coast's most charismatic political voice, the man whose rallies drew tens of thousands, now cabinet secretary for mining and blue economy, a government minister. Opiyo Wandayi, now cabinet secretary energy. Opiyo Wandayi's ODM former secretary general, one of the party's sharpest parliamentary debaters, the man who once led the opposition's assault on government policy from the floor of the National Assembly, now Cabinet Secretary for Energy and Petroleum, defending that same government's energy policy. Mudavadi, Wetangula, Badi, Joho, Wandayi, different parties, different regions, different timelines, same destination. None of them were defeated. All of them were absorbed. And once inside the government, the opposition voices that had defined Kenya's politics for a generation fell silent. not because they were silenced, but because they were comfortable. Political commentators say Ruto understood something fundamental. The most dangerous opposition politician is a hungry one. Give them a position, a salary, a motorcade, and the hunger disappears. You don't need to fight your enemies when you can feed them. But the most audacious move in William Ruto's political playbook was reserved for the man he could never simply absorb. The man was too big, too historic, too deeply woven into Kenya's political soul to be given a cabinet seat. Raila Odinga. When Kenya's government threw its full diplomatic weight behind Raila's candidacy for AU Commission chairperson, mobilizing embassies, heads of states, bilateral agreements, the world saw it as Ruto's being generous to a former rival. Some of us saw something else. We saw Kenya's most dangerous opposition voice being moved off the domestic chessboard entirely. For the better part of a year, while Ruto consolidated power at home, Raila was in Addis Ababa, while constituency networks went cold, while the party machinery needed maintenance, while the 2027 election machinery was quietly being assembled against him. Raila was lobbying African presidents for votes he would never get enough of. He came home to a party already in the early stages of being restructured without him, to a broad-based government deal he had signed months earlier that had already changed the rules of the game. He came home and 8 months later, he was gone. On the 15th of October 2025, Raila died in India. He was 80 years old. He had spent more than half his life fighting for Kenya's democracy, enduring imprisonment, exile, disputed elections, and political betrayal. He had never won the presidency. He had perhaps changed Kenya more than any president ever did. When Raila died, we didn't just lose a leader. We lost the referee. We lost the person who, in a room of 20 screaming politicians, could make everyone go quiet with a single look. Without him, every disagreement became a war. Every difference became existential. We had always known this day would come. We were never ready for it. Within 24 hours of his death, the battles had already begun. The National Executive Council, meeting without a full delegate process, named Senator Oburu Oginga as acting party leader. It was a decision made in grief and haste, and it planted the seeds of every crisis that followed. ODM Secretary General Edwin Sifuna has weighed in on this. He says, the question was never about Oburu personally. The question was, who authorized this? What process produced this decision? You cannot run a democratic political party the way you run a family succession. ODM belongs to its members, not one family, not to one faction. From the outside, the rallies looked like a party in good health. Crowds, energy, organization, but the questions being asked quietly by journalists, by opposition politicians, by ODM's own members were pointed. Where was the money coming from? Some MPs have said publicly what many in the party were saying privately, that President Ruto was funding the Oburu wing of ODM. Secretary General Sifuna, in a candid television moment, admitted that ODM had not spent its own money on the expensive national rallies, leaving the source of funding an open question. This is the most dangerous phase of political capture, when the captured party doesn't even know it's happening, or when the leaders know and choose to look away, because the alternative is going back to having nothing. Ruto's hand in ODM's operations became visible at every decision, the financing and the personnel. On the 11th of February 2026, the National Executive Council, chaired by Oburu Oginga, meeting in Mombasa, resolved to remove Edwin Sifuna as SG of ODM. The reasons given: indiscipline, undermining party position, disloyalty to the broad-based government arrangement. The same week, a video resurfaced. In it, President William Ruto, speaking at the burial of Raila Odinga's bodyguard, warned Sifuna that if he continued attacking the government, he will personally call a meeting where Sifuna will be disciplined. The video's timing, coming days after Sifuna's ouster, was not lost on observers.
Hivi ndio tulianza hii kitu ama namna gani? Na unajua, ukinisukuma sana nitaitisha mkutano ya founder members ya ODM. Ndio? Na unajua, tukiitisha hiyo mkutano tunaweza kufanyia discipline sisi ambao tulianza chama. Ndio? So twendeni mosmos. Ile kitu mimi nataka.
The utterances made by other leaders. For example, the party leader, Mombasa Governor Nasir, says the decision was made by the party's legitimate organs after careful deliberation. There was no instructions from State House, no phone calls, no interference. This was an internal party matter and it has been resolved. However, just looking at that video, just looking at some of what has been happening in ODM, it is clear where the instructions are coming from. Sifuna himself has said he will not serve mediocrity. I quote, "I will not be the Secretary General of a party that has been surrendered to the very people we fought for 20 years. If this is what ODM has become, then ODM has betrayed itself, and I will not be part of that betrayal." When you lay the stories side by side, the patterns become impossible to ignore. Mudavadi got a title and dissolved his party. Wetangula got a chair and his party withered. Raila got international stage and was removed from the domestic field. Each path was different. The destination was the same. What Ruto executed was not a handshake strategy. It was controlled demolition strategy. He did not destroy these parties. He gave them gold-plated reasons to destroy themselves. And in doing so, he achieved what no Kenyan president had managed since Moi, a political landscape where there is no credible, organized alternative. In the party's heartland, the confusion was palpable. ODM always had been more than a party. It was a community institution. Now its leaders were holding rival meetings. Its Secretary General was in court suing his own party. Its acting leader was defending the government of the man ODM had always defined itself against. When Raila Odinga died in October 2025, he left behind a party that had fought for reform for 30 years, street by street, election by election, prison by prison. The word reforms was not just a policy position for ODM. It was the blood memory of the party. It was why people voted for them. It was why people died for them. Oburu Oginga inherited that word. The question was, what would he do with it? Before Raila died, he had extracted a 10-point agenda from William Ruto's government. It was not a partnership agreement. It was ODM demands made by an opposition that had watched the country borrow its way into crisis, that had seen young Kenyans shot in the streets, that had called for accountability on devolution, on public appointments, on reparations for the victims of political violence going all the way back to 2017. These were the terms under which ODM agreed to join the broad-based government. Ruto's obligation to the Kenyan people with the ODM as witness. But Oburu Oginga came to that document with a different reading. In his interpretation, the 20-point agenda was not the government's obligations to ODM. It was a plan to be jointly executed by ODM and UDA together. A shared project, coalition responsibility. The significance of that interpretation cannot be overstated. The moment you make the opposition jointly responsible for the government reform promises, you have effectively abolished the opposition. You cannot hold a government accountable for commitments you have agreed to alongside them. And then came the second interpretation, the one that stand even some of Oburu's own allies. The 10-point agenda, he argued, was not time-bound. There was no deadline, no benchmarks, no review mechanism, and therefore, this is the argument that requires you to sit with it for a moment. ODM must support Ruto's re-election in 2027 to allow the agenda time for implementation. Think about what is being said. An agenda that was ODM's demand is now ODM's reason to campaign for the man who has not implemented it. The demands have become the justification for loyalty. The conditions have become the chains. August 2027, 14 months away. The reparations had not come. The debt audit had not produced no public report. Constitutional reform remained a conversation held in conference rooms. And Oburu Oginga was telling the Kenyan people that the answer was to give Ruto 5 more years. Raila Odinga founded a party that said hold power accountable. His successor will say give power more time. These are not the same thing. They are in fact the opposites. On corruption, in April 2026, a scandal broke in the energy ministry. Billions in question, procurement irregularities, the kind of story that in another era ODM would have been the loudest voice in the room about. But something happened at a meeting convened in the aftermath of the scandal. Opiwandai, the energy minister and ODM man, one of Raila's own, stood up and spoke. And in his speaking, he revealed more than he perhaps intended. He spoke like a man who was present, who had an office, who attended the meetings, but whose hands were not on any of the levers. He made plain for anyone listening carefully that policy in that ministry, direction, decisions, the real choices came from one place, from William Ruto. ODM brigade in government has not become policymakers. They have become conveyor belts. They did not bring reform positions to cabinet. They carried Ruto's positions out of it. They did not push back on the agenda. They amplified it in public statements, in parliamentary votes, in press conferences. They had become indistinguishable from UDA, not because their ideology has changed, but because they had stopped using it. They were, in the truest sense of the word, models, dressed in the uniform of power, positioned for the photograph, but not driving the vehicle. On the question of the energy scandal, of the corruption, the original 10-point agenda had demanded to be investigated. ODM said nothing that the government had not already cleared for them to say. The outrage was calibrated, the language was safe, and it stopped precisely at the point where accountability had become personal. This is not the first time that we see ODM quiet. Every time the Auditor General produces a report where there are issues, scandals, money lost, things not working, the same response comes from ODM government ministers. Most of the time, they're quiet. Oburu is very quiet. He doesn't speak much about these things. He doesn't weigh in at all in most of the cases. Most of the time, he comes out to say negotiations are ongoing about political process that is 14 months away. Yet, citizens are demanding and looking at issues which are affecting them today, and which he says nothing about. On policy, policy is where a party prove themselves when power is not fully theirs. What bills do you push? What positions do you hold? What do you refuse to vote for, even when it is convenient? Oburu Oginga is not an ideologue. He is a pragmatist. In politics, pragmatism often presents itself as wisdom. The danger is when pragmatism becomes the permanent postponement of principle. Strategy for any political party is the art of knowing what you are fighting for, who you are fighting with, and how you will win. By early 2026, ODM strategy had become a contradiction in every sentence. The party had two competing national delegates conference, one convened by Oburu's faction, one resisted by the Sifuna wing. Two different versions of the same party, fighting over the same name, the same registration, same flag. Edwin Sifuna, the Secretary General, had become the uncomfortable conscience of the party. He asked publicly what others whispered privately. Why is the government paying our bills? He held the line that ODM had to remain an opposition, that you cannot be both inside the government and the check on the government at the same time. But perhaps the most revealing statement Oburu made, the one that exposed the deepest confusion at the heart of his leadership, was that the ODM had entered the government through the back door. Think about who is saying this. Oburu Oginga is an elected senator. He was placed in that seat by Kenyan citizens who cast votes for him. ODM has 23 governors, 23 elected across this country under Azimio banner, and about 163 legislators were under Azimio banner as well. Men and women who stood before constituencies and said, vote for me, I will serve you. And the people did vote for them, not for Ruto, for them. These are not people who sneaked in through a back door. These are elected representatives of the Kenyan people. And in a constitutional democracy, in the Kenya that Raila Odinga spent 30 years trying to build, elected representatives do not owe their allegiance to the president. They owe it to the people who sent them. Because there's the thing that Oburu's framing gets exactly backwards. Citizens do not become part of government. Government exists to serve citizens. We pay taxes, we vote. We are the reasons the government exists at all. The constitution does not say that the government will provide services if it is in the mood, or if the opposition is cooperative, or if the correct people are in the cabinet. It says the government shall provide those services. That is the word shall. It is not a request. It is an obligation. When Oburu says ODM came in through the back door, he is not being modest. He is surrendering the moral authority of every Kenyan who voted for an ODM candidate. He is telling his own governors that the mandate came from Ruto's goodwill, not from the people. He is, whether he knows it or not, teaching his own party to be grateful for access rather than demanding of accountability. And frankly speaking, if the same people, knowing what they know now, were asked to vote again, they will not want to vote for Ruto. They will want to vote for ODM. Raila Odinga never believed he came in through the back door. He believed he came in through the front, through the streets, through the crowds, through the vote. The back door was for the people who needed the president's permission to exist, and that was not ODM until now. And then came the reports that William Ruto wanted Sifuna gone. That the pressure to remove him was not coming from within ODM. It was coming from outside, from the very government that ODM was supposedly watching. A sitting president intervening in the internal affairs of the opposition party, funding its leadership, directing its agenda, removing the voices that will resist his influence. This is not politics as competition. This is politics as acquisition. Ruto was not fighting ODM, he was managing it. And the tragedy, the deep structural tragedy, is that it is working. This is the one that cuts deepest, because ODM was never just a political party. It was a movement built on the bodies of people who had been wronged. The post-election violence of 2007, the disputed results of 2017, the young people shot in the streets in June 2023 while holding signs. Social injustice was not one item on ODM's agenda. It was the agenda. In early 2026, police fired on crowds at a Linda Mwananchi rally in Kitengela. A man died, but he was not at the rally. He was not a demonstrator. He was not holding a sign or chanting a slogan. He was going home from work. Kitengela was his route. The disturbance was in his way, and a bullet found him anyway. The country waited for ODM to speak, because ODM had always spoken against injustice, not just to mourn the dead, but to name what killed them. to demand accountability from those who gave the orders, to make sure the system that allowed it could not simply look away and move on. That was ODM's purpose. That was its history. And we have just seen some of the 10-point agenda was to ensure that these things were not going to happen again. What came instead from John Mbadi, Cabinet Secretary, senior ODM figure, was surprise, not outrage. Not a demand for accountability, surprise. He was surprised that the person killed was a Luo. Sit with that. A man going home from work is dead, shot on his route. And what startled John Mbadi was not that the police had killed an innocent person, it was the tribe of the person they killed. As though if the dead man had been a Kikuyu or a Kalenjin or a Luya going home from work, the death would have made more sense, more expected, more acceptable. He never said that directly. He didn't need to. The surprise said it for him, and that is the most damning kind of statement. The one that reveals what a person truly believes before they have had time to arrange their words carefully. ODM was founded on the principle that injustice against any Kenyan is injustice against all Kenyans. John Mbadi, in one unguarded moment, showed how far the party had traveled from that founding principle. And the violence has been growing, not quietly, not hidden. In months since Raila's death, Gunism has returned to Kenya's streets. Organized groups disrupting civic meetings, activists threatened, citizens intimidated for speaking. There are serious and credible allegations that some of this violence is not spontaneous, that it is hired, that it is coordinated, that elements within or connected to the state may be involved in enabling it. These are allegations, but they are allegations that a healthy democracy demands investigated openly, urgently, and without fear. The attack on Godfrey Ototsi happened in broad daylight, in a city full of witnesses, the kind of brazen assault that is designed not just to harm one person, but to send a message to everyone watching that this is what happens and no one will stop it. Oburu said nothing, not after Ototsi, not about the pattern, not about the allegations, not about what it means for a democracy when citizens are attacked in broad daylight for speaking. The man who leads the party that Raila built, the party that finds itself through its willingness to confront exactly this kind of injustice and keep standing, had no comment. The violence was happening, the allegations were circulating, the silence from ODM was complete. ODM still holds its own rallies freely. The party convenes, the governor speaks, the senators are driven in. Nobody attacks them. Nobody blocks their meeting. The rights that Raila bled for still protect them. They just no longer feel the weight of those rights because the rights have never cost them anything recently. It is very easy to take freedom for granted when you have forgotten the price for it. The reparations had not come. The investigations had not concluded. The accountability had not arrived. And the party that had always stood against these injustices was now sharing platforms with the very government being asked to answer for them. The young people who had led the 2023 and 2024 uprising had trusted no one, not Ruto, not Raila, not ODM. They stood in the streets on their own terms and now watching what was happening to the party that should have been their natural home. They understood why. They had seen the end of this story before it was finished being written. For the ODM brigade in government today, being in power is not a means to fight injustice. It is the destination. It is the point, and they will hold on to it at any cost at any silence, at any compromise, because the alternative is to be what ODM used to be. And what ODM used to be was difficult and dangerous and honorable. Raila Odinga spent his life being difficult and dangerous and honorable. His party, 6 months after his death, had chosen a different path. Where that path leads anywhere worth going, that is a question that 2027 will answer. This is not a finished story, and this is not a perfect documentary. What you have just watched is the first part of a 2-part series, an attempt to make sense of a moment of Kenya's political history that is still unfolding. Some of the questions raised here do not have answers yet. Some of the answers we have offered today may make sense a little more when we do the second part. That is the nature of covering politics in real time. Part 2 is coming. It will cover 3 scenarios for ODM going into 2027 and what each means for Kenya, not just the party. There is more to say. There is more to examine. If this was useful to you, if it made you think or question or remember something you have forgotten, please like the video. You may not like what you see, but liking helps more people find it. We don't like what we see as well, but we keep saying it, hoping that it can actually bring us to our senses in some of the things that we see happening in our country. Subscribe so that part 2 is ready. You'll be the first to know. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about this country enough to sit with a difficult story for this long. We will see you in part 2.